Okay, thank you. It's 11:01. And I just want to start by saying welcome. Welcome to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Climate Hub Network webinar on climate challenges and solutions for the Caribbean region. I'm Andre Bradley, the coordinator for the International Climate Hub, a fairly new USDA resource with tools, information, and initiatives for international users that you'll be learning more about today. I'm joined by Barbara Bennett, the director of the International Climate Hub, and Bill Gould, the director of USDA's Caribbean Climate Hub, who will talk to you about the vast resources of USDA's climate hubs and how they can be applied across similar regions and climatic zones. Before we get started, I wanted to share information on a few logistical items. You can either choose the original audio selection to listen to the event in English, or you can choose the Spanish channel if you prefer that. If you missed that option in the beginning or want to change languages later, choose more, then language and speech, then interpretation language. There's also sign language interpretation available. Okay, so now I will attempt to repeat that part in Spanish for those who need it, so just bear with me. Puede elegir la selección de audio original para escuchar este evento en inglés o puede elegir el canal en español si lo prefiere. Si no vio esta opción al principio o desea cambiar de idioma más tarde, elija más y lugar, idioma y habla y después idioma de interpretación. También hay interpretación disponible en lenguaje de señas. Okay. So you could turn on live captions using the same language and speech submenu and selecting Turn on Live Captions. Also, please feel free to type any questions you have in the chat. We might pause to answer those written questions as we go, but if we don't worry. We have reserved a significant amount of time for discussion and questions after the presentation. Because of the small size of this webinar, we have enabled cameras and sound, so please feel free to put your cameras on and ask questions that way as well. We'd like this to be as much of a discussion as possible. So now, let me turn it over to my director, Barbara, to set the stage for our webinar series. Barbara?
This is the first webinar in a series of 4 aimed at the Caribbean region. They're going to take place on Tuesdays through the end of September. The second one is going to be an in-depth look at a great resource that Bill Gould's team has developed. It's a set of Caribbean adaptation guides for tropical ag and forestry. The third webinar is going to go into detail on 4 specific things that we thought would be of interest to the region. And they are growing stress-tolerant varieties, very interesting, working trees for small islands, so an agroforestry topic, and then applying geospatial technologies like AI and drone technology. We also thought it'd be interesting to cover diversifying practices for profit, like shrimp farming, for example. And the fourth webinar is going to cover international and regional opportunities for continued engagement. And the whole point of that is we don't want this to just end here. We'd love you to stay involved with us. We'd love to help you find ways to get connected to other international efforts. So I just want to explain kind of how this webinar series came to be. It is a joint effort between the International Climate Hub, which is me and Andre and 2 climate fellows, and Bill Gould and his staff that focuses on the Caribbean region. And it just couldn't have happened, however, without the work of a few folks. And those include Candace Bruce and her team. Some of you know her, I believe. She's been serving for several years as a director of the Foreign Agricultural Services Caribbean Basin Agricultural Trade Office. And she just saw the need for this type of webinar after seeing the impacts of climate change to agriculture and forestry in your region. And she just insisted this needed to happen, and we absolutely agreed. She's actually, I think today's her very last day, and she is being replaced by Katie Woody, who is also joining us to listen in to today's event. So to the 2 of them, I just want to thank you for recognizing how important climate change is to this region, which I think we all recognize bears disproportionate effects of climate change. The irony is not lost on us that we were supposed to start this webinar series last week, but we couldn't. We postponed it because of yet another tropical storm in your region. Our own speaker, Bill Gould, who, as I said, is located in Puerto Rico, lost power. He couldn't have participated. And we knew that many of you would also be boarding up homes and doing your usual preparations. And it just must be such a familiar routine to you doing this. And rising sea temperatures, it's just going to keep producing stronger and more frequent storms and hurricanes. We all know about Hurricane Beryl and the incredible damage that caused. I know that estimates are still coming in, but at least $20 million of damage just to Jamaica's ag sector. And several islands across the Grenadines were completely devastated and were relying on food aid now, especially Carriacou, which was basically stripped of all vegetation. We can all only hope this is an anomaly, but the realities of climate change mean that we probably do have to anticipate similar scenes of devastation in the coming years. And this is why the International Climate Hub chose the Caribbean for its very first regionally focused webinar series. We do not have all the answers, but we're excited to share our expertise, our experience, and our tools as part of USDA's commitment to global information sharing on how to address climate change in agriculture. And that is really why the International Climate Hub was founded. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Bill Gould, who's going to provide an overview of our really cool network of USDA climate hubs, and he'll talk about his own specific climate hub. So Bill, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Andre, and welcome to all the participants. Now, my first challenge is share my screen, make sure I can share the presentation. How's that look? Hopefully you're seeing that opening slide there. Well, as Barbara mentioned, I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of the USDA Climate Hub Network to provide some context. And also, although the Caribbean Climate Hub focuses on the U.S. Caribbean, it's located in Puerto Rico. We work with Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. There's all kinds of work among the Climate Hub network throughout the United States that has potentially applicable tools, solutions, ideas, and opportunities for collaboration with international partners. And let's see here. So the USDA Climate Hub program includes a set of 10 regional climate hubs and the International Climate Hub that Barbara leads. And the mission of these hubs is really to deliver science-based, region-specific information and technologies that enable climate-informed decision-making. So it's really providing information that helps people make decisions about climate adaptation, climate mitigation actions. And we really focus on 3 work streams: scientific synthesis and analysis, developing decision support tools and information, and developing engagement and outreach activities. And I'll go into some detail and provide some examples from our Caribbean region on those activities. The climate hubs are a pretty unique program within USDA. USDA is one of the biggest departments in the federal government. There's over 100,000 employees. The climate hubs are led by 3 of these agencies, 4 actually. Our NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, the Forest Service, and the Agricultural Research Service, and the Foreign Agricultural Service, which leads the International Climate Hub. So these agencies within USDA, they have good research and application focus. They have leadership of these hubs. Each of the hubs has a lead agency. For example, 5 are led by the Forest Service, and 5 are led by our Agricultural Research Service. But these 3 agencies collaborate with co-leadership and development of activities in the climate hubs. I go into some detail with this with our some of our Caribbean partners, because we're often asked, how does this function, this organization that really works across agency boundaries to address climate change? And that was really the idea within USDA. It was the hubs were initiated 10 years ago to bring some climate expertise and a platform for really working across the agencies within the Department of Agriculture. and working with some of our other federal agencies on climate change issues, sharing data, sharing ideas, sharing problems to work on, and sharing solutions. So we work on a set of priority issues, and it's really been fairly dynamic over the last 10 years as more and more focus has been put on addressing climate change. And so the Climate Hub Network, with this participation of different agencies, lots of different kinds of expertise, has been fairly nimble in terms of looking at where the issues are that an organization such as the Climate Hubs could work on and really support the bulk of the workforce of USDA that's addressing these issues. And so some examples of those priority issues are working on adaptation and climate resilience, working on mitigation issues, working with the USDA agencies to develop their adaptation plans and implement those adaptation plans, working with climate disasters such as wildland fire and hurricanes, developing climate literacy within our agency workforce, working with other components of our agency that work with producers to really see how we can integrate climate smart practices in agriculture and forestry, thinking about and considering environmental justice in all the work that we do. Who are we listening to? Who are we reaching with our information? And then working internationally as well as a priority for the hubs. Within USDA, we consider the hub workforce, which is not a big workforce. Each of those hubs has 2 or 3 permanent staff members, and then upwards of 10 additional staff members that are brought on with kind of temporary resources for projects. But we consider that workforce a force multiplier for USDA service providers, really working with the agencies that work directly with farmers, work directly with research agencies, and supporting with them, collaborating with them on climate-related issues, and leveraging that capacity that the big workforce of USDA has to have a greater impact. And the climate hubs over the last 10 years have really become a model for how do you develop and deliver climate services to agricultural and natural resource managers by utilizing the capacity of USDA and its partners. We sort of see our role as kind of a boundary organization, working with partners in foundational research, applied research, working with outreach and extension organizations and programs to be a program that can listen, hear what issues are, and connect solutions from the research community to the outreach and practitioners. And we work, one of our primary customers in a way are the USDA service agencies and other federal agencies that work with climate change issues. But also there's a broad range of stakeholders at cooperative extension, at our land grant universities, farmers, ranchers, foresters, and rural communities. We kind of consider that whole universe of potential users for the climate services that we can provide. I mentioned we working these 3 work streams. All of the tool and technology development, decision support, outreach, and convening is really based on the best science. And each of the 10 regional climate hubs are located at research institutions, so there's a strong connection of the staff with current research, and that serves as a basis for the tool development, the decision support information, and for the outreach work. And these 3 work streams are all blended. I'm going to share some examples of some of the outcomes of these work streams from the Caribbean Hub. But we have a very collaborative method of working and providing deliverables in all these work streams. And that includes really identifying actors, identifying collaborators and participants that are relevant to a problem or an issue, building partnerships, making sure we co-explore what the needs are, before we get to the delivery stage, really working through the whole process as a co-development process and co-developing the solutions and then delivering those solutions with our partners. And that's always an ongoing process of you learn new things or you deliver information, you get 5 more questions that generate. So there's always an opportunity to improve the work that we do through that collaborative process. So the Climate Hub network and all the work of the Climate Hubs is really based on these key climate challenges, increasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, rising ocean air temperatures, local patterns of rainfall and temperature are less predictable, they're changing, sea levels rising, the frequency intensity of extreme events is increasing, the global food production and fiber production and markets are vulnerable and less predictable. And so all of that really is at the core. Understanding that is kind of at the core of the work that the Climate Hubs do. And of course, there's a lot of research capacity that's focused on climate change. And there are numerous organizations around the world that are providing daily, hourly updates on observations in terms of the effects of climate change. There's a continual improvement of the projections, what we expect to see depending on our activities and how much greenhouse gas we put into the atmosphere, and a lot of study of the physical, the biophysical, the social effects of those activities and the potential effects of those projections. And always, I think, in terms of extreme climate events is kind of where the rubber hits the road in terms of what people are experiencing. And so understanding how we respond to these kind of disasters and how we reduce the disastrous effect of these extreme climate events is critical part of the Climate Hub's work. I'm going to share with you a little bit, just some examples from the Caribbean Climate Hub of how we're approaching some of these issues. And I want to share with you the Climate Hub team. Includes myself, there's a coordinator, there's a lead research scientist, and then a group of participants at the postdoctoral level or technical support level that help us. Typically, our hub is typical of the other regional hubs where you have a core staff that's supported by either the Forest Service or Agricultural Research Service. And then you have team members that are brought on through competitive grants or particular projects that have support for that capacity. So you would see a similar staff at the 10 regional hubs around the country. So in terms of the science and data synthesis, that first work stream that I mentioned, the Climate Hubs throughout the regions, they assess, they synthesize climate risks and vulnerabilities really based on regional needs and input. And as I mentioned, these syntheses provide a real foundation for what are the climate risks, what are the adaptation mitigation efforts that can help reduce those climate risks. As an example of our connection with that foundational research in the Caribbean, and for those that are joining us from around the Caribbean, pardon me, if we're focused on the U.S. Caribbean, we realize that it's a bigger world than Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, but that's our footprint. So I sometimes just call it the Caribbean. So we have participated in a leadership role in a couple of rounds of Puerto Rico's State of the Climate reports, and in the 4th and 5th National Climate Assessments for the U.S. Global Change Research Program. The 4th climate assessment was one where I led a U.S. Caribbean chapter, and it's the first time that chapter has been included in the National Climate Assessments. And now we expanded that work in the 5th National Climate Assessment and are starting to work on the 6th National Climate Assessment. Those are assessments that come out every 4 years from the U.S. Global Change Research Program. So those assessments really capture some of the key information about climate projections, climate observations, and climate impacts that are based on peer-reviewed literature. So they synthesize some of that information and they provide good connection to the peer-reviewed literature that's behind that information. Some of the key things that were important for us were getting downscaled climate information where we could better understand the internal variation in terms of rainfall and temperatures that we can expect across the U.S. Caribbean. Those of you that work in the Caribbean, you know the global models are a little bit coarse scale for understanding those impacts on the island. So those were important foundational science products that the Caribbean Climate Hub contributed to. Building on those assessments are really looking at those observations, looking at those projections, and trying to understand what those impacts are across the U.S. Caribbean. So we participated in some analyses of the hurricane forces from Hurricanes Maria and Irma that hit Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands pretty strongly in 2017. Tried to understand and model from that information what might be the impacts of similar hurricanes in the future that had similar wind forces, similar rainfall, similar tracking speeds, or if there were combinations of high rainfall but slower hurricane speeds, what would the flooding impacts be for Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands? Trying to get a sense of what we might see in future scenarios with bigger, more moisture-laden, slower-moving hurricanes. Drought is also an issue across the Caribbean. So we've also done some assessments of past drought activities, looked at the impacts on various sectors in agriculture and forestry, and then tied those to the climate projections. What might we see in the future in terms of impacts from drier conditions, warmer conditions. And one of the things we've also been interested in doing is using our research work to connect with expertise in different sectors. So the Climate Hub staff is not large, but we do have the opportunity to connect with expertise, for example, in the folks involved with beef and dairy operations, with fire occurrence, with assessing vulnerability of coffee. Those are all analyses that we've done with collaborators where we take some of that core climate information and pair it with expertise from different sectors and get a sense of potential future impacts of climate on those sectors. So that was a little bit of an overview. We're currently doing more research looking at suitability for cocoa or cacao farming in Puerto Rico, doing some assessments of energy vulnerabilities based on analyses of night light and loss of energy across the islands. So there's continual pipeline of new information that we're trying to promote through the Climate Hub network, and then build on that with our other work streams, which are developing tools for decision-making and information for decision-making and creating outreach and engagement opportunities. So I'm going to share just some examples of that work at the Caribbean Climate Hub. We've developed a number of digital tools. A couple examples are our farm planning tool, which is a tool that incorporates a lot of the geospatial information for Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands in a format where a user can easily define an area of interest, clip out the information related to the characteristics of that land, and then get a PDF report on their telephone in a matter of 2 minutes. And so it's one way we're trying to connect the kind of volume of available scientific information that's well documented with your average user that may want to know something about their particular farm, their forest, their conservation region, their municipality. And this is proven to be a widely used tool in Puerto Rico and we're starting to see more use in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And we had an organization in the Hawaiian Islands that essentially kind of copied this methodology. So it's something that, I think there would be potential for users across the Caribbean islands. It's just easy to use for farmers with small operations where it's often difficult for them to connect with that kind of scientific or geospatial information. Another tool, I think we call our agricultural statistics tool. A number of the islands share some characteristics in that we don't have the extensive data sets that you often find in the continental US about agriculture activities. And so for Puerto Rico, we have developed a platform in working with the Puerto Rico Department of Agriculture, where we have the information about what was planted and what was harvested for about 100 different crops in Puerto Rico. And we have those in table format and also spatially represented so that you can get a sense of where the different crops are grown throughout the island. And this information has been available, but not readily available to your average user or to research users. And this is another tool you can look at on your computer or your phone. You can select crops and years and regions for Puerto Rico and extract that information. We're working to develop this for the U.S. Virgin Islands, but there's a need for greater compilation of that kind of information. And that may be similar to other Caribbean countries as well, where there hasn't been necessarily a kind of comprehensive collection of data from agricultural operations in a way that you could display this, look at trends over the years, look at the impact of events such as climate events on different sectors. This data set has, as I mentioned, about 100 different crops, and there's a lot of connections to other information about those crops in USDA databases. Another aspect where we've been sharing tools is looking at drought occurrence and working with users across Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands to try and do a better job of capturing where drought is occurring and bringing that information to our national drought monitor team so that they can better characterize the drought scenarios in Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. And we publish every 2 months an update on drought conditions. We also use a couple of citizen science activities to get people observing, monitoring, and reporting on drought conditions on their farms or their areas of interest. And we have a program called CocoROS that is international as well as in the United States. It's a citizen science drought monitoring or rainfall monitoring program where you have a fairly simple rain gauges, do daily measurements, and you can report that to the CocoROS program, and they will manage that data and integrate it with data from around the world, really. And this is a great tool just to get people talking with us, talking about their farms, their situations, getting them interested in capturing that information and reporting it to this network. So it's good in and of itself and the data you capture, but also just a good way of kind of meeting people where they are and talking with them about issues that matter to them. A couple more slides about our outreach program. I want to share some of the activities in a project we call Climate Smart Caribbean that's supported by our National Institute for Food and Agriculture. Its basic tenet is to try to build climate literacy within Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and there's a number of different components, 40 different workshops, different kinds of activities that we're developing in this collaborative partnership. And I'll share a couple of the more interesting, I guess, or well, they're all interesting. I'll share a couple of those. One we call the One USDA workshops for farmers and forest managers. And this is an activity where we take advantage of the Climate Hub's connection with all of the USDA agencies, and we create a forum for dialogue between farmers and forest managers and the agency personnel. So we do the logistics, set up these workshops, invite our USDA agency partners to join us. We may have a theme of soil health or drought issues or hurricane preparedness. But for the participants in this, it's a time where they can meet the USDA agencies that are working on these issues. They can meet some of the NGOs and other partners that are funded with USDA funds. There are information tables. There are speakers that we invite, and a couple of the key activities we do at each of these is we have a panel of the USDA agencies for answering questions, and we invite a farmer who's using climate smart practices in their operations. We think it's really valuable to show folks that are in our region that are adopting practices that are working for them. They're helping their farms economically, they're helping build sustainability, and they're like our champions that share that kind of information. For each of these workshops, we also go to the farm of that champion, and we create short videos where they're sharing some of their climate issues and some of the practices that they're implementing on those farms. So there's a link there to our YouTube channel, and I'll drop that in the chat later as well. So that's one of the successful activities. This was some slides and examples of what we do at those USDA workshops. We're also in this program developing a Caribbean Soil Health Learning Network. This fall, we'll be starting a series of seminars on soil health activities with partners in the Pacific Islands. And we'll be happy to share more information about that with this group as it gets developed. Two more products that came out of this project are the development of what we call the Caribbean Climate Resilience Game. It's a board game where you can create a scenario where you have a farming operation, and you can make choices where it may be from a high intensity agriculture to something as low intensity as just conservation of forest land. And there's some options in between with agroforestry, irrigated, non-irrigated crops. And then you can make selections about climate adaptation practices that you might apply on your farm. And then there are costs associated with everything. So it has an economic component, and then it has a chance component. And you roll a dice, you pick cards, you have big hurricanes, you have drought, you have failures in government support. We worked with the developers to really make it realistic for the Caribbean region. And it's turned into a fun game. You can have teams, you can be competitive, and see who can build the most sustainable operations given the kinds of climate uncertainties and other uncertainties that farming operations face in the Caribbean. One last outcome of this project I want to mention in terms of developing climate literacy is thinking about kids. We have a program we call Climate Kids Backpacks, and we've developed a backpack that's got scientific information in it, but also information at the level of kids K through 12 age. And we try to connect them with some of the key messages that come out of the National Climate Assessments 4 and 5, and translate it in a way that it makes sense to them. What do these key messages mean when you talk about water scarcity or you talk about rising sea level? How can someone at that age level relate to those and learn from those and bring it into their daily lives? So we've kind of pioneered these with a couple of educational groups and children's museums and gotten some great response. So we're developing, we're not mass producing, but we're going to have a number of these backpacks. And the idea is that an organization that does education at this level can have a set of these backpacks with lesson plans ready to go and share with their teachers. Okay, one last kind of a product that I want to talk about, and this is actually the subject of next week's seminar, are these adaptation guides for tropical forestry and agriculture that we've developed at the Climate Hub. There's a manual that we've developed and a number of folders or additional information that are sector specific that go along with this manual. This is a system of decision support management that has been developed in the Climate Hub network nationally and then modified for a range of different users, whether they're tribes or Pacific Island agriculture, and in this case for Puerto Rico and US Virgin Islands. And so it follows a methodology of thinking about climate adaptation in 5 steps, where you understand your landscape, you understand what the climate impacts and vulnerabilities are, you think about what your personal objectives are, and then identify some practices that will reduce your vulnerabilities, increase your adaptive capacity, and identify some USDA or other programs that can help you reach those objectives, and then monitor, evaluate, and use that as kind of a cyclic adaptive management program. And it works at various scales. That system from countrywide to a municipality to the farm level or a forest level. And so the products that we have available, and they're in English and Spanish and currently available online, include the overall manual that works you through that process, a short guide that covers the same material but with less background on climate projections, and then a set of 10 guides for sectors related to poultry, forest, cocoa, coffee, fruit trees, livestock, vegetables, plantains, bananas, small ruminants, and root crops. And the sector guides may be something that would be of interest to folks, and we'll go into detail at the seminar next week. Really, last slide. The whole intention of the Climate Hub network is really to tap into the expertise in USDA, be able to work across our agency boundaries to deliver not only back to our agencies, but to their customers. How can we mitigate climate change and how can we adapt to climate change? That's really trying to develop materials that are relevant and specific to our island scenarios to help us do that. So thank you, Barbara. I'll stop sharing here.
Thanks, Bill. I think I speak for everyone. It's very impressive. It's exciting. I think everybody wants that game. There were a lot of questions in the chat about the game, so a lot of interest there, but just a very impressive body of work that you've accomplished over 10 years. So thank you for that. And I will now talk about the International Climate Hub, which is the newest in the Climate Hub family. And we are much like our regional climate hubs in that we do the 3 things that Bill mentioned, the 3 bodies of work. So we're also doing science and data synthesis. We're doing tools and support, and we're doing outreach, training, and convening. But we're brand new. We have been around for about a year. And so a lot of our work in the past year is sort of getting us going. And I'll talk about what we're doing now and what our plans are for the future. Let me just say that, as you noticed, actually, I'll go back to the previous slide. You see the map. This is where the regional hubs are located in the United States. And all these hubs serve the farmers, ranchers, and foresters in their region. The International Hub serves you. our goal is to be a global resource. So you are our customers, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about in the question and answer session is just what all would you need? What do you want? What can we do to serve you? So what we're doing right now is we are sharing U.S. climate science internationally. So I will actually, after my presentation, take you to our website and show you some of the things we're working on. We're also trying to expand so we have international coverage. Of course, we want this to be a global resource where we're highlighting what other partners are doing as well. Bill mentioned a drought learning network and I think a soil health learning network. We're starting our own very first international climate learning network. It's small, it is on viticulture. And the concept there is that we're sort of partnering up. We are seeing a need in the US for international expertise. We're seeing a need internationally for other ideas on a product that is definitely suffering from climate change, which is wine grapes. So the international learning networks that we're envisioning will include a couple of elements. They'll have dialogue groups that get together regularly, and they will be participant led. So they're going to focus on issues of importance to them. The International Climate Hub will get involved in trying to see if there's a tool, if there's a resource or something that would be useful to these groups. And then we'll have a convening function where we get people together so that work can continue, perhaps stimulating more joint research or whatever the group has decided to focus on. It'll have a resource page on the International Climate Hub website. And so our very first climate learning network in viticulture will launch in December. And it'll start with an event in Portugal. We're doing climate smart farmer to farmer study tours. It's again on a small scale where we're doing one for a group of Japanese visitors in September. I'm really excited about the Global Gateway. This is a new part of our website that we're going to create, and we are creating it right now, and it should be ready by October. We're going to have a really fun little tool in there, the Agroclimate Atlas. So it's combining some climatic factors where we show current conditions and past, so you can have some reference to the past, and we're overlaying it with agricultural lands. So that will launch in October. It'll be a home for all of the new initiatives that we're planning. So our webinar series will live there. Our interviews with international farmers called Know Your Global Farmer. Our communities of practice that we're trying to create. So like the climate learning networks and a few more I'll talk about. We're also actively working on one of our tools. I will demonstrate it to you later today. It is great as it is, but we're trying to make it better. And I'll talk about that effort when I get to the demo for that. All right, so here's what we're trying to do next year. We are creating a network of people like you. So people that we speak to, we interact with in trainings and one-on-one sessions. We want to have an alumni of those people who can create their own network, a community of best practice. We'll have regular events with that network, and we're excited to get that going in the fall of this year. We are also launching an International Climate Hub Country Liaison Network. That's where we're going to ask every country to suggest someone that we can work with, someone who would be able to indicate great resources in country, help us identify farmers that are doing interesting things, subject matter experts, so we can really grow this into an international community. We're working on a global crop suitability tool. It's a big project, and this falls into the science and data synthesis category and also the tool category. But we are going to be analyzing a whole bunch of crops and determining, running it through some climate models and determining changes in yield, emergence, and overall suitability for areas all over the world for these crops. So we're excited about that effort. I mentioned the Climate Learning Network that we're launching, and I'll head on to the next one. This falls into the hopes and dreams category. These are things that we're pursuing a little bit farther out. Again, we're new, and so this is what we're hoping to build to. We would love to have an app that is a climate smart resource and finance finder. You have a need, you type a need, you get an answer. So that's an exciting future project. The Global Farmer Youth Forum. This is a result of us talking to a lot of countries and recognizing that a lot of countries have similar challenges. And one of them is aging farmers. And an opportunity is the fact that young people are so interested in climate and sustainability. We're trying to combine those two. So we're developing a forum that is going to have an educational, fun kind of component and get people excited about climate smart farming. Educational models, we talked about that. I don't know if I can do anything as cool as a game or a backpack, but now the challenge is on, so maybe we will try that. Climate smart commodity partnerships. This is a really amazing thing that USDA has done in the last few years. I don't know if you're aware of it, but we've invested $3 billion in climate smart commodity partnerships. These projects, they were competed, tons of interest all across the United States, and we have selected winners of these grants. And basically, they have three elements. One is that you have to grow your product in a climate smart way. Two, you have to document actual environmental and climate benefits. And three, you have to have a market for these products. You have to create a differentiated market so that farmers can earn a little bit more for doing these best practices. The International Climate Hub is committed to sharing what we learn through that process internationally. So as we do get results in from that major investment, the International Climate Hub will be sharing that information out through our website and through events. And as you'll see, as I poke around in the website for the climate hubs, if you go to any of the regional hubs, you're just going to be blown away by the tools that exist for people in that region. And what we hope to do over time is to take some of those very best tools and make them international. So that is a big future project for us as well. So with that, I want to just head you over to our website because sometimes it's just best to see things in person. So bear with me one second. All right. So if you just Google USDA climate hubs, you will come up with the website. Not this one, I've already gone to the International Climate Hub, but I want to show you here. You can pull up the Northeast Climate Hub. You can pull up the Northern Plains. You can pull up Bill's, the Caribbean. And there you're going to find amazing resources, some of which can be used and they can be applied internationally. We're obviously going to talk about the International Climate Hub and some of its resources. All of us are set up in pretty much the same way. We are organized by topic. So if you're particularly interested in animal topics, you can go in and learn about reducing methane emissions in Sri Lanka in the dairy sector and see if there's something applicable to you there. Or virtual fencing as a climate adaptation strategy. This one's really interesting. This is a project that the Foreign Ag Service did with UC Davis and Vietnamese institutions on a ration software that helps reduce emissions and improve productivity. So that special combination of things. So you click in on any one of these stories, you get contacts, you get a link back to the report so that you can keep investigating and keep getting further into something that would interest you. Again, a whole bunch of different topics. I guess, if you're interested in crops, you could see something about solar powered drip irrigation and soil health that we did in Tanzania. So this, I'm not going to go into those. What I want to show you is some of our tools. Now we're new, but we do have some tools on our website and I encourage you to take a look at them. So for example, there's a water supply stress index. This global reservoirs and lakes monitor, it measures reservoir and lake levels all over the world. This GIMS one is easier. We call it GLAM actually. And that one allows you to see NDVI or a greenness index. That's kind of interesting. We talked about this one UC Davis project. This is another Global Farm Animals Rations program. What I want to show today is Comet Planner Global. This is a tool that allows you, the user, to search anywhere on a map. You can type in your actual address if you want. For today's purposes, I'll try something in the Dominican Republic. How about that? Scroll up here. What this tool does, it uses NASA satellite imagery, and we can find ourselves some agricultural land. It's detailed enough that you can actually find your own farm here. So let's say this is you. And it tells you right here, just broadly speaking, you have high activity clay mineral, it's tropical moist climate. If you wanted to look at the soils data, you'll see here's the key high activity clay mineral. If we did zoom out, there are different types of soils represented. Up top, we're seeing low activity clay mineral. Anyway, so you can at any point see your soil type and your climatic zone. But the point of this tool is really the parts down below. It allows you to say whether you're a smallholder or a commercial plantation. To me, that looked like a small farm, and I would guess cultivated croplands. And now what you can do is talk about conservation practices that you either do today or ones that you're curious about, and you want to see what kind of impact there would be on carbon sequestration in soil. So let's say you're thinking about adding cover crops, and you might want to convert some of your land to fallow, actually, with trees. So you want to introduce some agroforestry. For each of those practices that you selected, you would put in the field size that you're thinking about doing that practice in. And you would see the amount of carbon estimated to be sequestered in soil as a result of those practices. Now we're building this tool out to have a lot more functionality. So we're going to be adding livestock practices and all kinds of animal practices. So even, small ruminants. And that will allow us to talk about methane reduction. And we'll also include practices with fertilizer use that we can talk about nitrous oxide reduction. In addition, we're trying to build some level of country analysis. So a country official could use this and select their whole country. And for example, figure out if I made, let's say we want to experiment with a policy of requiring no-till, and we're talking about applying it to our entire country. What would the impact be? So this is a predictive tool. It is based on publicly available information. It's based on IPCC Tier 1 methodologies and publicly available data. So it is not as precise as the US tools that do this on a domestic basis where we have very detailed data sets. But it is an inspirational tool, and it helps to push sort of in a general positive policy direction. So with that, I think I will stop sharing, and I will turn it over to our climate fellow, Morgan, who is going to demonstrate the Global Agricultural Disaster Assessment tool that we have on our website. And I will just tee her up by explaining a few things about this tool. We have several tools that are on the International Climate Hub website now that were actually developed for a different purpose. As I said, we're new, but the Foreign Agricultural Service has been doing international assessments of global agricultural lands for decades. And in fact, we feed in to the World Agricultural Supply and Demand process, which means that every month we're doing global supply and demand of crops. And we have used these tools for years. Our crop analysts have used these tools. This one that we're going to demonstrate today has so many data layers in that it's still drawing the map. It has 1,000 data layers in here. And one of our big efforts in this new, some of the new tools that we're launching is to use the richness of this, but to pull out a few of these data sets and push them to our users. It's very complicated and a hard to use system. It's amazing though. And it looks like Morgan might be having some technical difficulties. Morgan, do you want to weigh in on how it's working for you?
Yeah, hi everybody. This is a very, very cool tool, and it has been thinking for the last 20 minutes since we started. It really is a very hefty tool that has tons of layers and really, really rich sources. Like Barbara was saying, let me zoom out and see if it'll load out here. Here we go. It might slow down in a minute. Like Barbara was saying, this tool, the Global Agricultural and Disaster Assessment System, is used by our Global Market Analysis Department in the USDA. And they use this platform to inform trade decisions based on where crops are and how they're being grown. And then they take this information and overlay it with geospatial, real-time, very rich historical data from sources like satellite imagery that are constantly up to date with remote sensing sources. On the map that you can see right now, we are showing something. I'll pull out and show you the whole global image of it so you can kind of have an idea of what this is. So we are visualizing something called standardized precipitation index. And you can see over in the legend here that we have different colors that are associated with different levels of drought. And this index is taking the current conditions and comparing them to the past 30 years of data that we have for precipitation and creating anomaly type indications for where we are compared to the historical data. So you can see here, of course, in our windward side of things, we're pretty waterlogged from the storm last week. Let's see if this will load for us. And if I turn off standardized precipitation index, I can also look at a different data layer called soil moisture in the root zone. Let me turn this off here. And again, if you look over at the legend, you'll see different colors associated with different normalized measures of where we are in our soil moisture based off of the historical data. So you can see that this area here, and I was noticing also pretty heavy. Let me see if I can mute this. Sorry if that's a little distracting. Barbara or someone, could you mute that other thing? Yeah. So in this blue section here, you can see that it is above 70% of the normal soil moisture level that it normally would be, of course, because of the impacts of the storm last week. We can scroll over here and see that this is heavily waterlogged as well. And we can overlay this data set with different crop measurements of where crops are in the region. So we have yams in this area here, and I can turn off the root zone section, lower it a little bit, and we can overlay it with the crop zone. So you can see how these different weather these weather implications are having an impact on the different crops in the region. So you can go over and select different crops. From many different kinds of options. You can go with coffee, you can go with tobacco, you can do cassava and yam. I'm looking at a root crop right now because those things are going to be heavily impacted by the waterlogging. So you can take the transparency of the different layers and show directly which crops are growing where and where the different indicators are having an extreme impact on these crops. So of course you can take this information and tie it into the broader context of recovery and resilience over time as well, because we have such a historical reach for most of these data sets. You can compare this to different areas that potentially have different kinds of practices, maybe climate smart practices, and you can see if the yields have been impacted by the different weather indicators. So you could see on the map visually that an area that has terracing practices used for coffee trees might have a higher resilience and a higher yield, even in a time when there was heavy winds, rather than in an area where there wasn't terracing and that kind of thing, which of course has lots of implications for ag ministries providing support to farmers, policymakers for incentivizing these kinds of practices and supporting those kinds of practices that are ultimately more resilient to climate change and better supporting of the farmers for the yields over time. So this is a really cool tool. If you tried to follow the link, it might not open for you unless you have really solid internet, but I recommend going in and trying to play around with it. It's really interesting. But stay tuned for the light version of this application on our website coming out this fall.
Thanks, Morgan. And
Yeah,
you know what
thank you.
you just saw is some of the difficulty with the tool. It's so rich that it takes some time. You need great bandwidth, and that's why we're doing a smaller version of it. I do want to share my screen and show you one thing that when you first load the tool, it does show agricultural disasters, because remember, it is an agricultural and a disaster assessment tool. So this is near real-time data. You can click on any one of these things and get a full report. This is Tropical Cyclone Ernesto. There's all kinds of things, civil unrest, all kinds of things that feed into this system. So we use this quite a bit when we're trying to see impacts of these disasters as they're happening real time. So I just wanted to be sure to explain that aspect of the tool as well. So those are just some of the tools, some of the things that we're working on. We're very excited, as we said, to hear from you. We view you as our audience and as our customers, and we want to kind of open the floor for questions and thoughts and things that you've learned today that has sparked something, and also your ideas perhaps for further collaboration. So Bill, I don't know if you want to come on the line as well, and we can work on some of the questions that we already got. Have you already been answering them? Let's see.
Just a couple, but I could respond to them to the group as
Okay.
well.
So yeah, it looks like you got a question about how do farmers and forest managers in Puerto Rico find out about workshops as they become available? I'm not sure if it was Puerto Rico or if it was the greater Caribbean region.
There was one about Puerto Rico. So if you're in Puerto
Okay.
Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands, please just drop me an email. Hopefully my contact is somewhere, but I can drop that in the chat as well. And we do have a pretty extensive list of contacts, folks of interest, and we share upcoming activities with them on social media or via newsletters and things like that. So I'd be happy to follow up if someone's interested in that kind of communication. There was a question from Guyana about participation in the wider Caribbean, for example, with the games or some of the other tools that we have. We're very open to that, and our participation internationally, I hope it will increase now that we have the International Climate Hub and collaboration with the Foreign Ag Service. But we've always had an interest for a couple of reasons. We feel we're developing some things that could be of use to our neighbors around the Caribbean and some of the Latin American countries in the tropics. But also we just learn a ton. You know, I have to say every activity that we do is really a learning session, a listening session for us. And so every collaboration that we have really adds to our awareness, you know, of what the issues are, what kind of solutions we can help with. We do have an issue, you know, with capacity and bandwidth and trying to you know, find resources for those collaborations as well. But if there are specific interests of one of our games or tools, you can get in touch with us, and if they're of value, we can look for ways that we could share things or collaborate on future projects. Let's see.
I got one about a rural women network planning 17 days of activism in Trinidad and Tobago, and how can we arrange to have a workshop. We are, I'll just say again, we are very small. We started, but we are certainly able to participate virtually. We'd love to help support your workshop with a presentation. So I'm happy to talk to you about that.
Yeah,
Go
I'd
ahead,
love just to add
Bill.
to that the virtual collaboration, or that's really opened the door quite a bit to sharing and working together, and we're always open to that. That post about the rural women's network, reminded me of a project we have with what's called the Migrant Clinicians Network. And so there's a number of rural health facilities in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands where we're finding that they're dealing with things like heat stress and other climate-related health issues. And so some of the climate literacy material we've developed, we've tailored that for these rural health centers as well. And we're finding, that they see some value in that because they're having farmers or folks that work outdoors, they're coming in, they're dealing with heat issues. And some of the practices and things that we can share in these climate literacy lessons are valuable.
And we are also we're focused on a upcoming USDA sponsored, and many other countries got involved to sponsor the International Year of the Woman Farmer in 2026. And we have a lot of activities that we're planning for that year, particularly around the issue of women farmers. So we have quite a bit of interest in that area as well as the International Climate Hub. All right, let's see what else. I think, Bill, there were a lot of questions about the board game.
Okay, I'm not that good at following the chat.
Where can we find the board game?
Well, let me share that we have developed the board game in English and then translated out with audience in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and made some modifications. So we're at the point where we have a final version of all the parts of that board game. What we haven't done yet is actually, put it into a box that we could share with people. And so I'm hoping, over the next several months, we get to that point where we figure out how can we produce this so that we could make it available to people and just mail it to them, or work with people to do training sessions so that they can bring it into their work in classrooms or other sorts of activities. So I guess we'll stay tuned on that, and when we have that boxed version available, we'll be happy to share that. See a couple of hands up.
There's one more that might be towards me. What are the available opportunities for the greater Caribbean region? How reliable is the data and the tools for the Eastern Caribbean? So we are working hard on our island, like for example, the one tool I demoed, which is Comet Planner Global. We are working to increase the accuracy for island nations. We realized we had some topography issues, so we're addressing those still as part of our effort to improve that tool. But overall, a lot of our tools, unfortunately, rely on public data sets, publicly available data sets. So they can only be as good as the data, which is another reason why we'd love to work with countries through a country network where we could perhaps get access to better data to make it more usable to a country's own users. With that, I think we'll turn to some of the questions for folks who have hand raised. Louis Kanisha, do you want to pose your question? And feel free to come on camera, whatever you prefer.
Okay, well, that's my picture. Good day. I have a few questions. In the presentations that are coming up, will there be a discussion on the concept of hydraulic redistribution as to how we can integrate different plants to move water from deeper soil to shallow soil to facilitate crops, shallower rooted crops, and how when we have heavy rains, like you showed in the satellite imagery today of soils that are saturated, the ability for crops to then move soil water down to deeper layers to assist overall with maintaining soil water content. Is there any research on hydraulic redistribution of water?
Yeah, I'll let Bill answer that one.
Yeah, there may be some relevant information when we share more detail our adaptation guide and sector-specific information, because that has been an issue, particularly in U.S. Virgin Islands, thinking about, what specific species and varieties are going to augment your water management plans, in terms of moving water deeper, not transpiring as much or transpiring more water. So there may be some examples when we go into those sector-specific information that we discuss on next week.
Okay, thank you. One other question right now. What's the capacity of the Global Agricultural Disaster and Assessment System to also store data? So let's say what was brought up showed what is currently happening, and it seems also already, because of how it works, like a very data-heavy app. But is there the ability for us to look back, say, last week and the week before, and look at how there's changing patterns and trends?
Yes, and that's what's so amazing about it, is that we realize it's 30 years of climate data. And so we're trying to find ways to simplify that. So in that simpler tool that I'm talking about that we're developing, we'll be looking back at maybe maybe this month last year, this month 5 years ago, this month 10 years ago, this month 30 years ago, that sort of thing. But yes, there's definitely ability to look back at historical times. In fact, you can map that same region that you're interested for the same crops and look at now and look at 20 years ago. So it definitely has the capability to do a backward look.
Okay, thank you very much. I think just I'll wait for most of the other things in the presentations. I will say when we look at introduction of, say, shrimp farming, we will have to make sure that the people do it in the most sustainable way possible, because that has itself led to a lot of coastal degradation and issues. And the cocoa farming, I'll also wait to see the discussion on that, because my grandmother used to have cocoa trees, sorry. And what we found where I live is that she lived close to the mountain areas, but not at the base of the mountain per se. And most persons in that area have lost their cocoa trees. But as you go deeper into the forested areas, some cocoa trees have survived. So that might be a condition of temperatures, changes in rainfall pattern, etc. So I'd be curious to see the adaptations that you guys have in mind to expand the cocoa industry and cocoa farming in the region.
That I will mention that's an active area of interest in Puerto Rico. Cocoa has been grown for a long time here, but there's kind of a resurgence or a renaissance of interest. And in part, where the cacao plantations are pretty disease-free here, not facing some of the issues in other parts of Latin America with cocoa growing. And there's some great new research about how to Well, on varieties that are more productive in different microclimates and resistant to different diseases. So a lot of new information about cocoa farming. We're having a seminar here on the 30th of August. That'll be an in-person seminar that gathers some of the cocoa researchers from around the region to share new ideas in Puerto Rico. We hope to have, kind of a report out from that meeting as well. And we have some videos on cocoa seminars that we've had, workshops recently over the last summer, available on our website.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go. I'm Sherry Wainwright, veterinary epidemiologist with APHIS, USDA APHIS Veterinary Services. And I'm incredibly impressed with what you have presented and excited about how it can assist in so many ways. The countries, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and ourselves here in the continental United States, and Hawaii and Alaska, everywhere. And the other aspect that I noted to bring into your climate hub perspective are vector-borne diseases, which are hugely impacted by climate and by habitat. And I know that colleagues of mine will be interested in engaging with you to utilize these incredible resources that you've developed. So I look forward to continued connections with you and to share your information and perhaps some presentations with many of my colleagues.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing. For those that don't know, APHIS is a USDA agency, and one of the partners of the climate hubs from early on at not a real extensive amount. However, we've had some great conversations with folks in APHIS. There's a lot of research capacity as well as the kind of monitoring capacity that APHIS has. Lots of opportunity, I think, for collaboration. And I will mention that we've always had a bit of a capacity issue just because the 10 hubs were not well staffed or not huge staff. But in the last couple of years, we've brought on about 40 postdoctoral fellows throughout the regions, and that has really helped us with our capacity to collaborate on research with our partners at other USDA agencies. So let's stay in touch. Could be some good collaboration opportunities.
Super, thanks.
I would just add that one of the ideas, I didn't even put it on there, but because it's a big project, but one of the things I would like to pursue as we grow is an international biosecurity climate defense consortium of sorts to respond to some of those very issues that you're talking about. Even just understanding where research is happening, who's doing what is of great benefit. So there are a couple of folks with ARS that are interested in that concept and thinking through early stages of that. So very excited to hear your interest in that.
Thank you.
All right. Let's try. Okay. I was trying Tamika Seal Manzano.
Yes, hi, good day.
Hi.
I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, specifically from Tobago. It was an excellent presentation this morning. At least we are aware now of the different possible tools that we have existing that we could perhaps extrapolate for our area within the region. I'm particularly interested in getting some more information about the Year of the Woman Farmer coming up, the Farmers Youth Forum, and the Climate Literacy Backpack. Yeah. So I don't know if there's an email that could be posted in the chat. I mean, I'm having trouble typing anything in the chat, but I'm sure somebody could type in the chat. And I also wanted to know about, I realized, well, today we spoke a lot about agroforestry. And I'm wondering in the subsequent sessions if it would be a focus on agroforestry or whether agriculture itself would also be a focus, or is it from the agroforestry perspective that the other sessions would be focused on?
Okay, I'll try to take some of those. So the International Year of the Woman Farmer, we're going to talk about that in the fourth and final series, where we talk about international things that are happening that could be of interest to people and to keep sort of connected. So that'll definitely be covered in that. And I know you mentioned your interest in agroforestry. That will be one of the subtopics of the third webinar series. We have Working Trees for Small Islands, I think is the name of it, Bill. It's a special guide that was developed by the National Forestry Center or Agroforestry Center at the U.S. Department of Ag. So we'll have speakers presenting on that. And is there something I missed? Maybe.
The climate literacy backpacks and the farmer youth forum.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the globe. Go ahead and
go
talk
ahead.
about your backpacks. No, go
Sure.
ahead.
The backpacks they're kind of in the same position as the game board. We've kind of worked through versions of those in English and Spanish with partners in Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. We know what we need to do now, so that they have the lesson plans and materials, but now we've got to put them together. And so we're working with a group in California, the Climate Science Alliance group, to actually purchase a set of those, and then we'll have an idea. Okay, what does it take to put together 10 of these, or 5 or 30 of them, and share them with partners? So we'd be happy to share them. They will be. It'll be nice to have a little training about their use, but they're fairly self-explanatory as well. So you can have them, and there's lesson plans for teachers that are included with each one, and then the materials. So that might be, along with the game, I could see some value throughout the Caribbean. They're fairly kind of island focused in terms of the information that they have. And so I think they'll be relevant outside of the US Caribbean.
Okay.
And as for the Global Farmer Youth Forum, that is pending funding. So all, as I mentioned, we're new. The International Climate Hub is new. Like all the climate hubs, we're just going to have to grow slowly as we get funding. And so there is currently no funding for that, but it is an idea that we're pursuing should we get more funding. So more on that one later.
And one last thing, in terms of the Copper, I know the Copper Foundation is also looking at work in terms of climate smart agriculture. So they may be an agency that you might want to reach out to in terms of partnering with, or they might need your help. So I'm suggesting the Copper Foundation, if you could get in contact with them.
Great, thank you. It's a great tip. All right. Margot Fontaine.
Yes, good afternoon. I was inquiring about the backpack and the board game and so on, but I think I had my questions answered by the previous person.
Great.
But I'm an agriculture teacher actually with one of the government schools in the Nassau, Bahamas. And so I'm always looking for things that can make all these different topics that we're talking about here more interesting to our youth. And it looks like a good hands-on tool that can be used effectively in the classroom. And I'm just wondering too, if we can possibly give you some feedback as to how it works or how it can be maybe tweaked to our unique, situations and environmental challenges that we may have in our various homes.
I think that's an easy yes. Yeah, we'd love to have your feedback. Bill has his, and therefore his specific region, the folks that he serves, but I'm trying to reach international audiences. So if I were to adapt something like that, I would love to have feedback on what could be useful.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So just waiting to hear from you when it becomes available. Yeah. And thank you. It was a very informative presentation and really excited about what is to come in the future.
We are too. Let's see. I'm having trouble seeing names. How about Arathi?
Yeah, hi. Thank you. This was a wonderful presentation and a wealth of data. I am a research leader in the Pollinator Health Center in the Southeast area in Stoneville, Mississippi. And I'm curious about your plans to include pollinator health or anything related to pollinators and ecosystem services in this entire climate research. I've been involved in California with the wildfires and the impact of fires on honeybees. And we also have some plans to be looking at climate change aspects in the South, in the Mississippi Delta on pollinators and agroecosystem management. So I'm just curious, are there any plans on that and how to stay involved?
Well, we'd love to do a feature for our audiences on kind of your experiences so far. That would be a great thing for us to feature on the website. So I'd love to take you up on your interest and partner you with Morgan and Colin, our fellows, who are helping us to create content like that.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I have a scientist too that I can connect who works on data and he's interested in climate change data as well. Thank you so much. And I look forward to the others in the series.
All right. Thank you. Joaquin Antonio Gonzalez. I can't see your full name. I'm sorry. Please go ahead. You're on mute though. In the Spanish channel.
He's still
Hey,
muted.
Joaquin, you're still on mute.
Well, he might be in the Spanish channel.
I believe he's on mute,
I'm here.
and we should
Can you
have
hear
a.
me?
Yeah, we got
Yes,
that.
now we can.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, my mic was off. Hello, my name is Joaquin. I am Vice Minister of Industry of Development of Agro-Industry from the Ministry of Industry and Commerce from the Dominican Republic. What I would like to know is if there is some form through international cooperation for us in my minister to have some of these platforms integrated to some of our official channels at the art.
See nobody home? So nobody there?
I think we have a lot of unmuted folks. Let me try to mute some folks here. Okay. So basically, the International Climate Hub works within the Foreign Agricultural Service, and there is a possibility to have formal types of agreements. It typically is not required for us to work with another country. So we don't necessarily need a formal agreement to work with somebody. So it's not a requirement on our end. If it's something that would be of interest to you, it's something that could certainly be discussed. When that happens, when it's beyond just collaborating on a specific tool, if you're talking about sort of greater policy collaboration, that would have to be something that I include other people in, because that's a bigger thing than just me and the International Climate Hub. So if you're interested in something in that regard, feel free to reach out to me. And let me just put my email again in the chat. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay. And thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it.
Looking forward to your email, Barbara.
Okay. Yes.
Thank
you. All right. Benita Davis.
Your presentation. I trust that you're hearing me well. So my question is two parts. So we have the partners.
Obviamente tenemos los aliados.
Pardon? Oh, yes. So we have the partners of the Farmer to Farmer program from the Partners of the Americas present here in
So,
Guyana.
tenemos los aliados.
And I was privileged to actually meet with you at your office in DC when we were part of the fellowship program last year when I had a group of Caribbean students come across. What I wanted to know is if you continue working with Farmers to Farmers, and is there a possibility through that program that we can work along with Guyana outside of, well, the wider Caribbean and what you currently work with the US Caribbean? Yeah.
Yes, this is exactly what we want to happen with the alumni network that we're calling the Climate Hive, which is a reference to pollinators and beehives. So these are exactly the groups that we want to be able to capture and see if there's interest in working together. This is the kind of thing where we'd actually have webinars featuring these very people. They would present what they're working on, talk about, maybe break off into separate discussion groups. So yeah, this is the thing that we're trying to launch this fall. I'm very excited to work with you. So
yes,
a strong yes.
Be great. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you. And we remember that group very fondly. Melissa, did you have more questions? Melissa Fontaine. We can't hear you. No, sorry. You could type it in the chat if you had a question. You're not in the Spanish channel by chance? No? Okay. I'm sorry. My apologies. We can't hear you though. But happy to answer any questions you want to place in the chat. Were there any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all. We really appreciate your participation in this first of our 4 webinars focused on the Caribbean region. We hope to see you next week. It would have been every other Tuesday, but as I said, we had to postpone last week's until today. So we'll see you again next week, where Bill will talk about the Caribbean Adaptation Guide and go through that process and sort of the workbooks and that sort of thing. So a deep dive into that climate adaptation workbook. So with that, I think I'll close out today's webinar and thank you for joining. Have a good day, everybody.